nobody actually needs to care. Nobody actually needs to know. And yet, ironically, when you come into that kind of quiet, calm version of confidence, everybody starts to notice, everybody starts to care. It's very attractive, it's very magnetic, but you can't make it such that you're trying to force people to like you or trust you or see you a certain way.
Welcome to Happy to Offend You. Life guarantees that somebody's going to be offended by anything that you do. In fact, somebody right now is offended by life itself, but they don't have to be. This show guarantees that someone is going to be liberated from being offended by somebody else's offensive behavior. What? Yes, we said it. This show sets out to prove not only how to be liberated from being offended, and also how to be happy to offend. So if you're already offended, welcome to the show. And here's your host of the very offensive, Michelle Nedelec. Hey there, peeps. Welcome to Happy to Offend You, where you get to understand that just because you're offended by something doesn't mean you're going to die. And in fact, if you understand why other people aren't offended by it, we can actually create better connections and better relations and better communication, which we all thrive for. And of course, being independent and having a little sass never hurt anybody. So, yeah. We're going to find people who are out there moving and grooving and are happy to offend you too. So without any further ado, I'm super glad that you're here with us with my most offensive guest, Micky. Micky, thank you so much for being here. And I'm such sarcasm because she's adorable.
I love it. That's the best intro I think I've ever gotten.
She's like, I'm offensive. I don't know why you'd say that.
I mean, I can be. We can see. I always say I have Vince Vaughn humor, so clearly I'm going to push some people for sure. And I'm a New Yorker, and I'm Sicilian, so we can take it as spicy as we need to.
Fun. New York steak with a little bit of Brazilian spice. I love it. So give everybody kind of the highlight of who you are and what you do for business.
Yeah, sure. So I like to call myself a communications and confidence strategist. I am equal part tactical and mindset, but my favorite title is Director of Human Potential. Titles are so odd. That's my favorite title. That's the one that I feel like explains most of what my business does and most of what I do for the people that I work with the most. Nice. My favorite title is mom, to be clear. That's my favorite title, but that's not what we're here to talk about. That's too sweet and cute.
Well, actually, we might be. I do think that there's an important element in the mumness of understanding that, you know, sometimes you're going to scrape your knees, sometimes you're going to fall flat in your face, and sometimes you're going to be offended. And how do you deal with that? You know, from a 5-year-old perspective, a 10-year-old perspective, a 15-year-old, 55-year-old perspective, it all kind of comes into play. So I'm loving the human potential thing. How did you get into that as your thing?
Yeah, my background is I'm a trained facilitator and instructional designer. So my background is in leadership training way back 10 plus years ago with Lululemon. And one of the best jobs I ever had. I tell people
shout out for local company.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There you go. And that is not, I forgot you were Canadian. Yes, that actually, I did not intend that. That was not me buttering you up at all. But I genuinely tell people you need to work food and bev at some point in your life. And I also highly recommend you work at Lululemon at some point in your life, because for me, it was like going to business school for free.
Nice.
And I loved it. And so that's kind of where it all started. Before that, I had been ESL, English as a second language teacher. So there was just teaching in my blood. But Lululemon gave me a really great place to put some guardrails around it and work more with adult learners and more on topics that were of passion to me. And then there was a weird hiccup or two right after that where things happened that don't need to be talked about. And then I started working the last 7 years. I was working for a company based in New Jersey called Own the Room. I was brought on as a contractor to do leadership, communication, and sales training for Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies. And I loved it. I loved every second of my job, of my role. I did not love the company itself as much, but I did love that it put me in front of audiences. I would not be the person I am today if it hadn't been for them. But then that trainer part of me, that instructional designer part of me, and just started to feel a little bit more of a calling to work with people one-on-one, not just on their communication externally, how they were showing up for audiences, but also to work on some of the inner dialogue and get just a little bit more woo, if you will.
Yeah, we like the inner woo because, well, and whether you call it psychology or or energy or whatever, I think we all know when somebody comes up to the stage and they're grounded, that you have a solid, engaging conversation
Mm-hmm.
going on between the entire audience and the one person on the stage, and that it clearly takes not a different kind of person, but it takes a certain intestinal fortitude, as my mother used to call it, to be able
Yeah.
to do that. And the more you can hone in on what that is for you, because obviously, you know, somebody that's really outgoing, gregarious, physical, they're going to demonstrate that in a very different way than somebody who's very intelligent and introverted and you know,
Yeah.
thought provoking, but they still have gravitas when they go on the stage if they have that
Yeah.
intestinal fortitude.
Oh, I love that you just used the word gravitas because I've been playing with that word for a new program I'm building. The gravitas advantage is what I'm thinking of calling it. And gravitas is usually a more masculine word. And or you said it so perfectly that we tend to associate good communicators with those more extroverted, can go out, can wow an audience. But what my experience is those are not always the most memorable. They're memorable because they create an emotion and a feeling and an experience. But if I ask the audience, okay, now what did they say? Nobody could repeat them. And so there's a theory that I totally buy into, that introverts make the best communicators because they're willing to give it all away. They're not trying to make it about them. They're actually trying to make it about their audience. But then you get into the confidence piece and the authenticity piece and the I have to get up in front of people exhaustion piece. And so that actually is the perfect segue because that's why I started the company that I now started. Because that authenticity and confidence piece is so critical to me. The tools and the tactics are useless in a way. They're just not going to take you as far as you could go if you're not willing to also look at what's going on inside. And again, that inner monologue, inner dialogue. I mean, you tell me where you want to take this conversation because I can talk about this all day long. So yeah.
Well, excellent. How about you just talk for 45 minutes or so and I'll cut you
Yeah.
off at the end.
Be careful. Be careful. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. And I love I want to know, when you look at somebody and you see their potential,
Mhm.
can you articulate what it is that you see or how you see it? Because I think this is a fascinating concept with people who don't see their own potential,
Yeah.
and they're losing out on so much because they think that where they're at is what they have. And it's like, well, I just want to tell you these things.
Yeah.
Let's start there.
Yeah. So yeah, let's start with like the biggest question to
Yeah.
unpack. Sure. Sure. You got it, Michelle. Um, so what do I see? Let me try to put words around that. And this is interesting, right? Because a lot of I consider myself to be quite strategic and quite tactical, but in the last few years in particular, I will admittedly say that there is an element to my coaching, and maybe it is that it is this, or maybe it's just that it's experience and I like to put this fluffy word around it, who knows? But I do think there's an element to the coaching that is more intuitive at this point in my career, where as I'm experiencing someone, which is I think why you're asking the question that you're asking, but as I'm experiencing someone, I'm taking them in. And there's qualities about them that I'm experiencing. Now I'm only one data point, but again, if I give my experience some credit, I can extrapolate that into a larger experience that they may be having on their peers or on their team or on their family. And so, what does it look like to see someone in their highest potential? For me, it's looking for kind of those inflection points in a conversation or in an experience. When do I see them light up? When do I see them when do I see their eyes? And I mean, even over a virtual call, you can tell when somebody's onto something that they feel really strongly about. And that's giving me data, just checkpoint after checkpoint after checkpoint of like, what matters to you? Where do you light up? Where do you innately already feel confident? And then can I cross reference that with how you're living your life, frankly? Like, are you playing into your own skill sets? Are you playing into your own values? Are you aware how your values are driving a lot of your decisions? And especially in my case, a lot of your communication style. There's this one of the things I talk about one-on-one with clients are unmet and or unspoken expectations. And we all have them. We have a lot of unspoken expectations when we walk into situations, especially if you're in a leadership capacity. And a lot of those unspoken expectations that run the risk of therefore being unmet expectations of other people or yourself can be directly traced back to a value. And a really easy example of this is leadership styles that tend to be higher touch versus the kind of, oh, well, I don't like to micromanage my team. And then you get into this gray area of, as an example, I have a client who highly values independence and personal responsibility. Okay. And there's a reason for that. And it's more of a strength than anything else. I am also highly independent. But listen, independence can hold you back greatly, especially in a leadership position. Also, by the way, especially in a marriage, independence is a tricky value to have in a committed relationship. But her leadership style had started to be one of expecting other people to also operate from that value. And if they didn't, she inadvertently, not know she was doing this, but she inadvertently would see them as, I'll just be blunt, as unintelligent or as irresponsible. And it wasn't that they were unintelligent or irresponsible. It was that they were looking for a higher touch manager. That's all. No big deal. That this was a blind spot for her. And so I don't know if this answers your question at this point, but I think the one sentence summary is holding somebody in that highest potential and using that version, the best version of themselves to drive current versions.
Nice. I love it.
Yeah.
Yes, it does absolutely answer my question. And it brings up a ton of conversation because I think it's so important that people understand that no matter where they are in life, there's still kind of higher potential there. There's still things that we can unravel and that, kind of bring out our epicness, that it doesn't really matter where we're at in life, in whether it's our relationships or business, there's always one area that's not going to be kind of keeping up with the others. It's, that problem child. And oftentimes the problem child of our personalities gets neglected, and to be able to have somebody like you come in and see it so clearly, that I think it's an awesome skill set to have for starters. And because it has so much potential to bring so much hope and potential to other people in their lives. And then that then kind of moves out and on to so many others. So you're making such a huge impact by being able to look at somebody and show them just how much better they can be.
That's the hope, right?
Yeah. And so coming back to this example that you were giving us, because I think in business, we often make the mistake of thinking of having this universality of the negativity that we see in a specific pinpoint scenario. And then happy to offend you, that is probably the utmost of why that happens. But I mean, talk to me a little bit more about kind of how that happens within us, because I see it all the time. If you don't think the way I do, then you're not as smart as me. If you don't act the way I do, well, then you're not as whatever as I am. And we have this way of kind of blanketing people with just one, as you put a data point of experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, I have to call both of us out for a little bit, because you and I both have a value of, we'll just call it growth, self-development. And so, your reflection back in my first answer is very much aligned with that value. And so not everybody does, right? Like not everybody has that as a value. Um, the so first of all,
And by the way, if
we
you
like
don't, you're such a loser. Like, how can you not have the value of growth? Like, come on.
I mean, you're
Why are
bold
you
enough
even
to
here?
say it. And 6 people just signed off. um, but this is
6
what's
laughed.
interesting, and
So
it's a perfect segue into the question that you've just prompted, because we like it's confirmation bias. We actually like the negative. We really do. We love drama is the number one TV category. And there's a reason for this. We love it. We love the psychology of being able to pick something apart, being able to hate it just a little bit. And the sooner we just admit that and own that, the easier it is to kind of navigate through it. Now this gets problematic, obviously, when we turn the knife on ourselves, so to speak. But I do think it's really important to recognize that although I'm not an expert in this, like I know enough about neural pathways and what's going on in the brain and primal instincts, and we want to be prepared for the worst. And so we don't know the difference. I'll just use anxiety or nervousness when it comes to public speaking. Again, communication strategist, been doing it for a long time without fail. I used to lead a workshop it was like a half day workshop. And without fail, within the first 30 minutes of this 4.5 to 5 hour day, somebody would bring up 2 things. One, yeah, but I feel nervous when I go up and speak in front of people. Okay, fine. And the other thing that I'm sure we'll get to talk about a little bit is also confidence, but I need to be more confident. I want to feel more confident. This person is confident. This word that I have such a love-hate relationship with. Take the nervousness for a second. Your brain literally does not know the difference between a saber-toothed tiger coming to attack you and the same fear that's elicited when we get up in front of people, because we have the potential to experience the most dreaded sensation in the world, which is rejection. A friend of mine recently said this, and I love it. And she's wicked smart. She's smarter than I am. So I'm going to take it as truth. Rejection is like death to the human brain. And so many, we stay in the negative and we spend time over there almost in this preparatory fashion. Because if we can understand it, if we can spot it ahead of time, then we'll be able to thwart the danger, or we'll be able to minimize the cost, or we'll be able to eliminate the threat of rejection. And it's just not true. And so I think that's one of the reasons I kind of love the podcast, because the easier, let's say it this way, the more comfortable that you can get with rejection, the more, the faster you can have a bounce back rate from a no if you're selling something, or from, tough feedback from your team, the easier it's going to be for you to move forward, which means that you effectively have to be willing to offend people, because otherwise you're living in the mediocrity, you're living in this danger zone. And I think a lot of the work that I like to do with people more one-on-one rather than in the group is, what are the conditions necessary, unique for you? What are the conditions necessary for you to build up that resilience, for you to build up that tolerance, and for you not to feel like it threatens your belonging? And this is like where it has the potential to get really deep, because at the end of the day, I mean, that's what we're chasing. We want belonging. And sometimes, unfortunately, we can find belonging by making other people wrong. If you and I both hate Sarah, well, 2 against 1. And so we've manufactured belonging by isolating Sarah. It's so catty to talk about it that way, but that's what's going on. I mean, that's the undercurrent, is this like, stay in the tribe. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, and I think it's so true, and to me it's very Maslowian. If we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? One of those is that we need to be part of a group, and the issue is we can either get there functionally or dysfunctionally. And if we need to be part of a group, it's going to be dysfunctional, bar none. If we refuse to be part of groups, it's dysfunctional. And it's not that, and if we can understand kind of where we're coming at from this, then we can go out and find our group. We can create our group. We can attract our group in a very functional sort of way. But we need to understand the dysfunction of what we're creating in our lives so that it's, because it really does come down to this idea. If I offend them and I get kicked out of the group, then I'm nobody.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep. And it's Brene Brown's work too, a lot of it. If, braving the wilderness, in order for you to have true belonging, both to yourself, but also to the larger group, to your point, because we need both, you are going to have to brave it. You are going to have to offend some people. You are going to have to work through that discomfort of risking isolation, and you're not going to die. Like, you're not. Luckily, there are no saber-toothed tigers anymore. Like, you're not going to die. Yeah.
Especially on stage, if they jump up at you.
Yep. Oh God.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep.
We had I was doing a speaker training once. This poor girl was just terrified that somebody was going to stand up in the audience and like just lambaste her. And I said, okay, so what if somebody did get up and they did lambaste you? And they said, real or imagined, is there anything that could protect you from this? And she goes, a unicorn. I said, okay, great. So imagine yourself up on stage. This person gets up and starts like, this is such a crock shit. You don't know what you're talking about. And just go, yeah, but I have a unicorn. She starts laughing. She goes, that is awesome.
Yeah.
After that, she just did not care anymore. I was like, no matter what they say, yeah, well, I have a unicorn. Okay.
Wow.
just
Wow.
something, anything to be able to understand that there are no saber-toothed tigers. They're not going to come up and attack you. And you can have a ridiculous retort back. Like, yeah, well, I have a unicorn. And it just melts all arguments. It's like, okay, well, you can't argue with that one. Like, because clearly she does that.
Levity and yeah, levity and humor. I mean,
Right.
I'll confess, I have a pretty severe fear of flying, and I used to fly truly every week or two for work. And your brain cannot be nervous, anxious, fearful, and find something funny at the same time. It just can't. And so I'm the crazy person on the plane with my AirPods in, even though I might not be listening to anything. And I'm giggling. I've got my feet uncrossed. You don't want to have closed body posture, by the way. If anybody is a nervous flyer or you have anything that gives you anxiety, open up your body, arms open, legs uncrossed, feet on the ground, couple deep breaths, all the tips that you've probably heard before. But then also let a smile creep on your face, and you can even start to giggle under your breath. Nobody has to know. They could think you're listening to a funny, whatever show, watching something. And it reduces the nervousness enough. It just takes the edge off enough so that I can get through takeoff. That's so funny. Next time I'll try the unicorn though.
Right? Everybody needs a unicorn.
Yeah.
Or it works amazingly well. So going back to this kind of the potentiality of situations, does somebody need to know kind of the direction that they want to go in their career, in their kind of profession, if you will, in order to be able to live up to that? Or with working with you, kind of develop that and see it, and then they start to create that path?
Yeah. So it's a really obnoxious yes and no, like both and answer, only because if somebody comes to me with a really clear trajectory, this is exactly what I want, this is why I want it, I get a little suspicious. Because again, if we think about the decision making that's behind it, I tend to attract a lot of overachievers or high achievers or perfectionists, also because I am a recovering perfectionist. So I tend to attract a lot of people like that. If you have perfectionist tendencies and if you have high achieving tendencies, they have undoubtedly paid off over the course of your life and your career. And by the time I get to start working with people, they're at that inflection point where the same tools may not be the tools that they need to get where they're going. And so if you're making decisions using the same thinking that got you where you are, maybe it'll work, but maybe it won't. And so what I see tends to happen by the time somebody bothers to hire a coach, they're at that friction point. They're not usually hiring a coach for a coach's sake. They're there because things all of a sudden got more complicated, got harder. They're using those same exact strategies that they would do before, but the whole game has changed. Their life is different. They're different. And so that's why I named my company the Elevate Way, because you can't just keep staying at that altitude. Like, you have to change course. And so it's really good to go back to the beginning and just reassess. So what do we want? And why again do we want that? And where is that coming from? And what would that feel like? And it's much more about the feeling than the doing at the end of the day. So it's a yes and.
I love it. Well, and it kind of gave me the visual of the difference between the atmosphere and the stratosphere, and anybody who's tried to fly and go beyond it, even though you can't see the difference, it's like, well, what got me up here should get me past here. And it just doesn't. And we have to recognize that there are certain layers there and that the rules of the game change.
Yep, absolutely. And because a lot of the work that I do is around confidence, and I said I have a love-hate relationship with this word, but so confidence, the reason I have a love-hate relationship with it is because we use the word confidence to describe too many nuanced things that are intertwined and related, but are also distinctly different. Confidence is rooted in a self-assuredness or a self-trust, right? And so if you trust yourself to make good decisions, if you trust yourself to have the skills necessary to meet the moment where it is, well, then that's going to move you along, right? Like, it's going to keep moving the pieces kind of down the board. But a lot of times what happens with overachievers and with perfectionists is they don't actually trust themselves, not thoroughly. What they've done is they've used achievement to drive everything forward. So it's this constant perpetual, like, I have to do more, I have to know more, I have to learn more, I have to get more. And that's just, I mean, you can call it burnout, not to throw a bunch of buzzwords out here, but like, you will reach that point where they kind of ask, like, is it really going to be this hard forever? Is it always going to take this much effort? Am I always going to have to be achieving to get to the next level? And I mean, in my world, the answer is no, not at all. But you have to be willing to go back and say, okay, what do I already have? What do I already know? Let me reestablish a sense of trust with myself and operate more from that place. And the last thing that I want to say about that is, you know, I'm working to actually build this into proprietary work, but confidence is rooted in self-trust and the self-assuredness. And really, it's your tolerance for risk. So confidence directly relates to your willingness to take risks and your tolerance for that risk. The distinction is self-worth, self-esteem, that's your tolerance for failure. And this is where the belonging kicks in, because a lot of people have a pretty high tolerance for risk. But when things don't go well, and especially when you get to that manager, director, executive, VP level, you have to take more calculated risks. And if it doesn't pay off, there's perceived failure, quote unquote. That stings a lot more than it should, because there's actually like a self-worth gap. The foundation that they're building their confidence on is rocky. And I know nobody wants to be told that they have a self-esteem or a self-worth gap, but I would much rather know that the foundation of my house is falling apart than build this beautiful home on top of it and just like cross my fingers and hope for the best. So
absolutely. And I think in my experience, people also have a misunderstanding between confidence and arrogance.
yeah.
And when they don't seem to be able to see the difference in some other people, and they'll go, oh, wow, that person's awesome. I'm like, what do you see? Because he clearly sees something other than what I'm looking at. And then two, when they go to say, okay, well, I'll be confident in this scenario, then they're very arrogant. And it's like, okay, that's not confidence.
Yeah.
So talk to me about kind of how you perceive the difference and how people play it out around you.
Yeah, and I'll be really candid. One of the hardest pieces of feedback / advice that I was ever given, but it changed my life entirely, was overconfidence and insecurity are two sides of the same coin. And so this was very much my life. I always presented as very self-assured, very capable, very confident. That was a word that was very independent. These were the words that were used, late teens, all the way through my 20s, into my early 30s. And then all of a sudden it was like, number one, I don't feel it inside. So there's some disconnect there. Okay, fine. Imposter syndrome, but that wasn't it. And the other thing is, again, the effort, the amount of effort that it took energetically for me to actually achieve something, because I was constantly terrified that if it wasn't, 99% perfect, the threat was just too big. And so finally, around my mid 30s, it just got to the point where I was like, this isn't going to work. Like, I can't do it this way. And, the interesting thing about confidence and arrogance that I like you're bringing up is, confidence, I forget who said this, but I really liked it. And it's quite simple. Confidence is knowing your own value. Arrogance is assuming anybody else should care. And that's a little bit of a tough pill to swallow, but it's just the truth. Nobody actually needs to care. Nobody actually needs to know. And yet, ironically, when you come into that kind of quiet, calm version of confidence, everybody starts to notice, everybody starts to care. It's very attractive, it's very magnetic, but you can't make it such that you're trying to force people to like you or trust you or see you a certain way. And yeah. So again, I mean, I feel like I could go on so many tangents with this, but
well, then let's
that's a lot of the
kind of
work.
take it around kind of where I see this circling is because then with kind of the confusion that you're talking about between arrogance and overconfidence is the idea of a self-promotion. Because then people go, oh, but if I'm self-promoting, now I'm acting overconfident or I'm acting arrogant, and they aren't necessarily. And so this idea that other people need to be able to perceive your value when you're proclaiming, how do you identify the differences in that? One, from a public perspective, like what are you trying to put out there? And two, from an inner perspective of what am I trying to get out there?
Yeah. Well, I think it comes back a little bit to the nuance, and confidence and self-worth for me live in a Venn diagram because there is overlap. And this is a really good example of right where the overlap starts. Because is that a confidence opportunity gap, or is that a self-worth gap? And I tend to lean that now we're starting to tap into, unknowingly for most people, but we're starting to tap into their self-worth. But they're like, but I don't want to come across a certain way. And it's like, well, no, you have value to offer here. I know I do. I know, but I don't want to be pushy. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. Like, what story are you actually telling yourself? And the thing is, like, that again, you brought up Maslow, and it's not a perfect track back, but self-worth, again, rooted in belonging. Confidence is more rooted in security. And so security is a pretty basic, at least in Maslow's hierarchy, that's really basic. But all he was referring to was like roof over your head, you got some food, your life is not in danger. Most of us have those checked off. Most of us, not all of us, but most of us have those checked off. So now you have to start to get into the other kind of harder to pinpoint what's really going on. And it's risky. It's risky for me to put out my services. I'm assuming you were referring to like a business owner or a solopreneur or something. It's risky for me to put out my services and again, risk that rejection, risk that no, basically risk being told this isn't good enough, or I don't like it, or I don't understand it. And that's a direct hit, bullseye hit on somebody's value, self-worth. And so instead they'll play it safe and they won't do it. And so I think, a lot of, again, from a strategic standpoint, okay, what do you do? Great. This is all fun to talk about, Micky, but like, tell me what to do. A lot of it is creating a winnable goal. You can disagree with me. It is not, every situation is not winnable, meaning every every potential client that you come across as a business owner is not going to necessarily be a yes, nor do you want them to. So instead of making your goal to get a yes to avoid the pain of a no, that's not winnable, especially for somebody who's stuck in this muddy area where it's yeah. So instead, make your goal winnable, achievable, build a connection, make your goal to be the best possible listener, make your goal. I mean, sometimes I've had clients make the goal so little, like so small, like I'm going to show up on time and brush my hair. And if they do that, if they show up on time and they brush their hair for this 30-minute discovery call, we call that a win. And that's how you rebuild the self-trust, where it's like, but you are doing a good job, but there are things that are working, and you start to build from the ground, from the foundation up. And it doesn't take long. I'm talking like 30 days usually for most people. And it really helps as they start to get into higher stakes scenarios and higher stakes situations and need to build up that resilience reserve. Does that track? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too that the more somebody can identify these areas of understanding your self-worth and your self-validation, and going into Maslow's hierarchy again of self-actualization, is that self-actualization is neither arrogance nor it's not a breakdown, it's not a build up, it's just a simple understanding of who you are, what you bring to the table.
Yes.
The good, the bad, the ugly, the indifference, and just recognizing that that's what it is.
That is so well said, because it is, and it's so beautiful. I don't even know if you realize how beautiful that is, because really at the end of the day, like, people mistake confidence for like, here's all the things I'm good at. And it's like, I'm not concerned about all the things you're good at. I'm concerned about, here's the things I'm good at. And I'm going to own the things that I'm not good at. And I'm going to embrace all of it, the whole person. But we don't do that, especially not my perfectionists. No, they want to fix it all. That's not good enough. I'm working on it. I'm working on it. I mean, you are not perpetually working on something. I mean, this is like, you want to get really offensive. There is a lot of the study that I'm doing now is around narcissism, and narcissism, well, such a loaded word, especially in the States, for obvious reasons that maybe that's like really offensive. Maybe we shouldn't get into, but narcissism is like packed right now. Our experience of it in the last few years, I think people understand what I'm saying. And you know, the irony of confidence and arrogance and overconfidence and insecurity and self-worth and all these things is there's a necessary degree of narcissism that comes with wanting to be extraordinary. But you have to be so careful to walk that line of having only the necessary degree of narcissism. And self-actualization is kind of that. I mean, if any of us ever reach it, but it's that sweet spot of, I like myself so much, and yet nobody else needs to like me to reinforce that. But there's a narcissism in that, you know. And like, one of my favorite teachers on narcissism, one of the questions that she asked our group was Jesus narcissist? Was Martin Luther King narcissist? And like, my answer was yes, of course, because that's what was required. There's an extraordinariness there, but they keep it in check. If you look just at the pure definition of narcissism, not narcissistic personality disorder, that is something else entirely.
I was going to say, let's get into the semantics of this, because I think it is immensely important to understand that the psychological diagnosis of a certain personality trait versus somebody's tendency to act self-centeredly. It can be very confusing very quickly. So in just having kind of in just regular conversation, let's leave the psychology and the actual that to the side, is if you look at narcissism purely as, am I being self-absorbed in my wants and needs, then yes, everybody who has a goal is a narcissist. So let's get it out there. Am I a narcissist? Yes, absolutely. I am in that respect. And when does it no longer serve me? When does it become dysfunctional as opposed to functional? And when do I need to hold on to it tighter and stronger because I have to get through this particular barrage of whateverness? And I think anybody that goes in front of the media, anybody that has anything to do with politics, anybody that gets raked over the coals needs to have an element of it. You just,
Yeah.
I don't think they could survive it otherwise.
Well, and this is in it's quite simple. I think it's less about the label of I'm narcissistic, they're narcissistic. We're abusing that word too much. It's more about everybody has narcissistic tendencies. And so when you get into desire, when you get into things that people want, we question our own desires and we question our own wants. And a lot of that is because we haven't been able to embrace all the parts of ourselves, including the parts of ourselves that, might have this more self-aggrandized view.
And I think it's important to do it because when somebody judges you, they can only judge you from their perspective, right? They can only, somebody looks at me and goes, oh, you're a redhead. That means blah. Whatever that means to them is based on their experience, 100%. And based on my experience, 0%. It can't be. And I think people need to understand that is that I cannot control how you see me, how you perceive me, what you take offensively, what you don't. Some people are highly offended by it. Some people, and I can't take ownership of that offendedness from you. So in that respect, I have to understand that it is more important for me to understand where I'm coming from in this situation and that I'm happy coming from that situation than to start tiptoeing around whether or not people think I'm self-absorbed, self-centered, or whatever, because somebody's going to.
Yeah.
And just odds are.
Well,
yeah,
that's the irony of people that are easy to offend or people that like to play the victim card. They're actually usually in the most unhealthy relationship with their own narcissism.
Yeah.
That's why it's so easy to offend them.
Right. I love
Just
it.
saying.
Just saying. This has been an amazing conversation. I love it. So I'm going to skip down to I know our listeners are going to want more from you. How do they start their journey with you?
The easiest way is either on Instagram or through my website. So the website is theelevateway.co, C-O, couldn't get the .com, so it's a .co. And I'm on Instagram under the same handle, The Elevate Way.
Nice. And we will, of course, have all of Micky's links in the show notes. So scroll down, click on the links, open them up in a new browser because we're not done yet. So, Micky, I get to ask you, have you ever been happy to offend somebody?
Yeah, all the time. I've had to work on this because I think I came into the world kind of offensive, maybe. Are you looking for a story or an example?
Sure. If you want to give one, I'll take it.
God, I should have prepped for this a little bit more.
Nah.
Time that I offended somebody. I don't know why. I don't know why this is the story that's coming to mind. This is such a bizarre story.
See, but this is why I don't prep people for it. It's because it's whatever comes up is the most inane, and that's usually the most fun.
Well, I mean, this is kind of odd. So my parents, I don't even know if you could call this offending somebody, but it was certainly calling somebody out. And I think why okay, here's the pretext or the context. I think the reason my brain went here is because we kind of ended our conversation around narcissism, and the most beautifully narcissistic beings on the earth are children. They are appropriately narcissistic. And so this is probably actually why this story just came to my mind. My parents owned a restaurant, a bar and grill, when we first moved from New York to Charleston. And I'm an only child. They didn't really believe in babysitters. So I very much grew up in this bar, in this restaurant environment. And because I'm a tiny adult, and that's just, again, that's how I grew up, very independent, very mature, I would hang out with a lot of the patrons of the bar. But this one afternoon, I mean, we're talking 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I had just gotten to the restaurant after school. And this patron at the bar, who's a regular, was very drunk. I mean, very, very drunk. And his keys were on the counter. And he was getting ready to pay his tab, and he was like finishing up his drink, and he was getting ready to leave. And I walked behind the bar. So we're talking, I probably was 11 or 12, not super old. I walked behind the bar. I'm tiny. I'm 5'0". Okay. Just so you guys have a visual. I hop up on the bar. I reach over and I said, I'm going to take your keys. And his face just turned beet red. It's one thing to have like an adult call you out on your sobriety issues, but it's like a totally different thing to have this preteen who, I took his keys from him. My dad called him a cab, and that was it. He came back to get his keys the next day. And my dad said he never saw him drunk again. He came back to the bar, but he never saw him drunk again after that.
Wow.
It's really interesting. Yeah. I don't know.
But it's that to me is exactly one of the reasons why I love this show, because I think sometimes there's this moment where things click for people. I mean, you weren't being rude and obnoxious. You weren't judging him in that moment. You were just pointing out a fact. He recognized that fact, and it shook him to his core. So did you offend him? Probably. Were you happy to offend him? Absolutely. And in all the recognition of behavioral change, regardless of what the habit was that was going on there, I think to be able to bring him to a point where he becomes a better person because of it is paramount.
Yep.
And
again, that's the hope, right? I mean, right. I'm sure I embarrassed him, if not offended him, but it's just.
Well, sometimes our own loserness can be embarrassing. Yeah.
But you didn't die, and you didn't kill anybody else. Not on my watch.
Do we have our Foley's? Yeah, we have our Foley's. We all have our Foley's. So, I love it. Micky, you've been absolutely fantastic. Awesome. I thank you so much. I appreciate your time and effort. Do you have any last words for our peeps?
No, this is so fun. We'll have to do another one, because I feel like we touched on all these big topics and then just like moved through them really quickly. And now people are probably like, WTF. But no, this is great, Michelle. Thanks. It was really fun.
Awesome. Thank you again for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Peeps, this is Michelle Nedlick. Thank you for being here with us today. Be sure to subscribe to the show, share it with your friends. We love helping people grow.